Welcome to the Deep Dive. We aim to get right into complex topics so you can quickly grasp what's really important. Today, we're looking at a situation that, well, it throws a huge spotlight on digital security in government, and also on the promises tech companies make versus, the reality. Plus, this constant tension between needing to keep records and actually keeping secrets safe. We're digging into what went down with a specific messaging app, reportedly used by government officials, and the data breach that followed.
Yeah, it kicked off with something seemingly minor. A photo analysis suggesting Congressman Mike Waltz might be using an app called TMSGNL, not the standard Signal app most people know. And that one detail, it just snowballed. It triggered a whole series of investigations, and well, they uncovered some pretty worrying things very quickly.
It really did unfold like a cyber mystery, didn't it? You had open source intelligence folks digging around. And then, kind of surprisingly, the actual code for these modified apps just appeared on GitHub, a public platform.
Right. And then the big news hit. Reports of a successful hack. And not just one, but a second breach, which apparently led to the whole service being shut down.
And to top it all off, Senator Wyden called for the DOJ, the Department of Justice, to step in and investigate formally. Serious stuff.
Absolutely. And the core finding, if you cut through all the marketing fluff, is this. TeleMessage, the company behind TMSGNL, claimed certain security features. But the reality, proven by these hacks, is that they could access plaintext chat logs. They had the keys to the kingdom, so to speak.
Which, yeah, completely changes the game, especially considering who might have been using this app. It forces us to ask some really tough questions about data security, compliance rules, and just how sensitive communications are being handled.
It certainly does. And before we dive deeper into the tech and the implications, we should thank our sponsor, Stonefly. They're leaders in enterprise storage, backup, disaster recovery, AI storage, and cloud solutions. So if you're looking for secure, ransomware-proof storage, maybe air-gapped or immutable options, you should check them out. You can reach out to sales@stonefly.com to set up a demo.
Okay, so let's break down this app first, TMSGNL.
Yeah.
Said it looked like the normal Signal app.
Pretty much, yeah. That was a key part of the, well, deception, you could say. It was a modified version of the real Signal app, and crucially, it could talk back and forth with the real Signal app seamlessly.
So if I'm using regular Signal, I'd have no idea the person I'm messaging is on this compromised version.
Exactly. You wouldn't necessarily know, which, could lead to some awkward moments or worse. There was that reported incident with Mike Waltz apparently adding Jeffrey Goldberg from The Atlantic to a group chat by mistake.
Right. It just highlights how that expected Signal security bubble might have burst for people in that conversation without them even realizing it.
Precisely. The real difference was what TMSGNL did behind the scenes for archiving. Essentially, every message handled by the TMSGNL app first got stored in a database on the phone itself. It was marked with the status like, waiting to be delivered. Then the app would periodically bundle these up and ship them off to TeleMessage's own archive server.
Okay, and here's the kicker, right? That connection from the phone app to the TeleMessage archive server, that wasn't end-to-end encrypted.
That's the critical flaw. Despite TeleMessage's claims, that specific communication channel lacked end-to-end encryption. End-to-end encryption is like that sealed envelope only the sender and receiver can open. What TMSGNL did was like making a photocopy after opening the letter and then mailing that unsecured photocopy somewhere else.
Wow, okay, so the company basically advertised this full protection all the way to their archive.
But the analysis, and later the hacks, proved that wasn't true. Once the TMSGNL app decrypted the message for the user to read it on her phone, that plaintext version, the actual words, was then sent off to TeleMessage's server, unencrypted.
So it wasn't just sender and receiver anymore. TeleMessage itself could see the messages, and potentially anyone who got into their servers.
Correct. And adding another layer of concern, where was this archive server?
You mentioned it was on AWS.
Yes, hosted on the public Amazon Web Services cloud, specifically in Northern Virginia. Now, AWS itself is secure, but that specific environment isn't typically approved for storing, say, classified government information. And what's more worrying is reports suggest this server might have been publicly accessible online for a time.
Publicly accessible, yikes.
Yeah, unsurprisingly, TeleMessage pulled that server offline pretty quickly once the first hack reports started surfacing.
Okay, let's talk about TeleMessage itself. An Israeli company, right? And the founder's background is notable.
Yes, founded by Guy Levitt. He previously headed planning and development for a very respected technical intelligence unit in the Israel Defense Forces, the IDF. And that background, combined with the fact that the system architecture gave TeleMessage access to plaintext logs, Well, it naturally raises questions.
Questions about who ultimately had access, and potential data sharing, maybe even with intelligence agencies, given the setup.
It's a valid concern, given the architecture. We don't have definitive proof of that sharing, of course. But the system was designed in a way that prioritized the archiving over maintaining that strict end-to-end security Signal is known for. That potential pathway existed.
So how did researchers actually figure this out technically? You mentioned reverse engineering the Android app.
Right. They focus on the Android version mainly because it's generally easier to decompile to take the app apart and look at the code compared to iOS. Interestingly, the iOS version seemed at first glance to be mostly unmodified Signal code. The changes were mainly in the Android one.
And what did they find inside that Android code? Where did TeleMessage add their own stuff?
They pinpointed specific folders within the app's structure, like AppScriptum and Java.org and others related to archiving. They also looked at shared libraries. These are like pre-packaged code modules found in applibs. Decompiling those revealed TeleMessage's custom code.
Okay, so what were the key pieces doing the work? What did they find?
A few key components stood out. There's the Signal database. That's where Signal normally keeps all its data securely on the phone. Then there's something called TeleMessage Application Dependency Provider. Think of it as like a manager giving access to other parts. It connects things like the data grabber, which sounds ominous and kind of is, and the Signal database.
Data grabber. Okay, so how did it actually, grab the messages?
That involved the archive messages processor. This acts like a hook or a trigger. Whenever a message's status changed in the Signal database, this processor would kick in and use the data grabber's set message function to basically copy the message and stage it for archiving.
Staging it,
Mm.
and then something else sends it.
Right. That's the sync adapter. It's a background process, like a little scheduled task. It runs periodically, looks for any messages marked waiting to be delivered, and then sends them off to TeleMessage's archive server.
Using what? What part actually talked to the server?
That was the network manager component. It handled all the communication with that archive.telemessage.com address. And interestingly, inside that data grabber's set message function, they found it was actually mislabeling Signal messages as SMS messages when putting them into that temporary staging database.
Huh. Weird detail. So,
Okay.
can you walk us through the life of a message again, start to finish, how it ends up exposed?
Sure. A Signal message arrives on a TM SGNL phone. It gets decrypted and stored in the local Signal database, like normal. But then the archive message processor sees it, tells data grabber to copy it. Data grabber saves that copy of the plaintext message in a separate staging area, possibly labeling it incorrectly as SMS. Then the sync adapter wakes up, finds that waiting message, and uses Network Manager to send it unencrypted over the internet to TeleMessage's server.
So, the copy made for archiving never got the proper end-to-end encryption for that final journey.
Exactly. The encryption chain was broken right there.
In this technical breakdown, this theory of how it worked, it was basically proven true when TeleMessage actually got hacked, right?
Yeah, absolutely confirmed. The two hacks provided the smoking gun. The attackers managed to pull out, as they put it, snapshots of data passing through TeleMessage's servers. And this included chat logs, often formatted in JSON, which is a readable data format.
Readable meaning plain text. They just read the conversations.
Yes. They found redacted examples, but clear examples, of plaintext Signal messages. Also Telegram, also WhatsApp messages. For the Signal message example they shared, you could see details like network type labeled Signal, the timestamp, sender, recipients, even the subject line. If it was a group chat, the group name, and the actual message content in that case, it was a link.
And it wasn't just Signal, you said. Telegram and WhatsApp, too.
Correct. Finding plaintext messages from those platforms, too, really hammered home that TeleMessage had broad plaintext access on their servers. There was apparently one encrypted WhatsApp message found, so maybe some nuances are still unclear about how exactly everything was handled. But the big picture is overwhelming evidence of plaintext storage and access.
That's bad enough. But wasn't there something even worse found in the breach data? Something beyond the chat content?
Yes, arguably even more alarming. The hackers also obtained usernames and plaintext passwords. Passwords in clear text stored on the archive server that were apparently used to access lists of Customs and Border Protection employees.
Plain text passwords in this day and age. That's basic security failure 101.
It really is, just fundamentally negligent.
This whole mess really highlights that clash, doesn't it? Between government needing to archive things for compliance, like FOIA requests.
Exactly. Freedom of Information Act, state sunshine laws, agencies need to keep records.
And the fundamental need for actual security, like the end-to-end encryption that apps like Signal promise.
That's the core conflict here. TeleMessage built a system prioritizing that archiving function. They likely marketed it as a compliance solution, but doing so fundamentally broke the security model of the underlying app. And Signal itself, the real Signal Foundation, they've consistently disavowed any unofficial versions. They state clearly they can't vouch for the privacy or security of modified clients like TMSGNL.
And for the government agencies involved, not being able to produce records when asked. That's a big problem too, right? Lawsuits, fines.
Oh, definitely. There are significant legal and financial risks if agencies can't comply with public records laws for electronic communications, including text and instant messages. And studies show that while many government organizations allow texting for official business, a lot of them don't have solid policies or the tech to actually capture and retain those messages properly.
And the whole bring your own device thing, where employees use personal phones for work, that must make it way harder.
Hugely complicates it. How do you reliably capture official comms happening on potentially thousands of personal devices? It's a massive challenge. But there are ways agencies can improve. Four key things often come up.
Okay, like what?
First, real-time capture, systems that automatically grab the communications as they happen rather than relying on employees to manually save things.
Takes the human error out of it. Makes sense.
What else? Easy searchability. Centralized archives are key. Not having data scattered everywhere makes finding specific records for FOIA or legal discovery much, much easier. Third, using things like public records portals can streamline making information available. And finally, just having comprehensive compliance that covers all communication types, email, text, IM, everything. You can't just focus on email anymore.
Right, and definitely not relying on employees to self-archive. That seems like a recipe for failure.
Absolutely. It needs to be automated and policy-driven.
And we're seeing this reflected in the wider market too, right? The e-discovery market growth.
For sure. The electronic discovery market is huge and growing, projected to be over $25 billion by 2029. It just shows the sheer volume of digital communication data being created and the increasing need for tools to manage it for legal and regulatory reasons. Cloud-based solutions are becoming dominant there.
And finally, this telemessage incident even got official recognition as a known security risk.
Yeah, CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, they maintain what's called the Known Exploited Vulnerabilities Catalog. It's basically the government's list of security holes actively being used by attackers in the wild. It's a critical resource for organizations to prioritize patching. And yes, TeleMessage is now on that list.
When did that happen?
It was added fairly recently, May 7th, 2025, according to the catalog data.
And the advice when something lands on that list is pretty blunt, isn't it?
Very clear. Apply the vendor's patches or mitigations immediately. Or, if fixes aren't available, stop using the product, discontinue use.
So wrapping this up, the telemessage story is really a cautionary tale.
A very stark one. It shows the massive risks when security gets sidelined for compliance, especially with sensitive government communications.
It really drives home how crucial it is for organizations, particularly public sector ones, to choose secure communication tools and have solid data management practices that don't undermine that security.
And for you, the listener, it's worth thinking about that balance. How do you get the access needed for transparency and compliance without sacrificing the fundamental security of end-to-end encryption that's so vital today?
It's a tough needle to thread. And before we leave you with a final thought, we want to thank our sponsor, Stonefly, again. They're leaders in enterprise storage, backup, disaster recovery, AI storage, and cloud solutions. If secure ransomware-proof storage is on your mind, remember Stonefly offers air-gapped and immutable options. Contact sales at stonefly.com to schedule that demo.
So, the question to leave you with is this. We know cyber threats are getting more sophisticated. We know government transparency is essential. How can organizations possibly square that circle? How can they guarantee both rock-solid security and the legally required accessibility for all their digital communications going forward? Something to ponder.